Let's see how she gets back. The laughter, sharp and cruel, sliced through the warm Italian evening air. It belonged to Mike, my husband Mark's college buddy. Mark slammed the car door shut, the sound echoing unnervingly loud on the narrow cobblestone street. The taillights of their rental car dwindled rapidly, disappearing around a bend, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and the fading echo of masculine laughter. I stood frozen, my mouth literally still open mid-sentence from the argument we'd been having just moments before outside the small, charming trattoria in Castelvecchio. It was unthinkable. He couldn't just leave me here. "He's coming back," I whispered, mostly to myself, acutely aware of the curious stares from locals enjoying their evening meals at sidewalk tables. This is just one of his stupid stunts to scare me. But the knot of dread in my stomach tightened, cold and hard, as the minutes stretched into an eternity, then an hour. The sky bled from dusky rose to deep indigo over the unfamiliar Italian town, a town whose name I couldn't even pronounce correctly. How did a disagreement over Mark drinking too much at lunch escalate to this? If you're captivated by stories of finding strength after betrayal, consider subscribing to Life Stories 1. It's free and helps us bring more tales of resilience to light. The charming piazza, so picturesque just hours ago under the Tuscan sun, now felt alien and vaguely menacing as darkness fully descended. Reality crashed down with brutal force. Mark wasn't coming back tonight. This wasn't just a cruel joke. It was abandonment. I automatically reached for my purse, needing the reassurance of my phone, my wallet. My passport was thankfully inside, but my fingers frantically counted the cash. €80 and about $37. Barely enough for a cheap room for the night, certainly not enough for a train ticket, let alone a flight back to Chicago. Panic clawed at my throat as another horrifying realization struck. My credit cards. They were in Mark's wallet. Earlier that day, my small evening purse overflowing, he'd casually offered to carry them to keep them safe. Safe for him, apparently. The fight outside the trattoria replayed in my mind. It had started, as arguments often did, with me gently suggesting he slow down on the wine. His friends, Mike and Dave, part of the annual guys' reunion trip I'd been reluctantly dragged along on, immediately jumped in. "She's always controlling you, man," Mike had slurred, ordering another round for the table. When I finally stood up, saying I was tired and wanted to head back to our boutique hotel, Mark had followed me outside, his words slurred but his anger sharp and precise. Years of unspoken resentments, my frustration with his drinking, his annoyance at my perceived nagging, all boiled over in a torrent of ugly accusations. "Your purse has your passport, right?" He'd sneered, his eyes cold, just before climbing into the driver's seat with his equally intoxicated friends. "Then you'll figure it out. You're so smart, Chloe, always telling everyone what to do." Laughter followed as they drove off. Now, shivering slightly in the cooling night air, I found the cheapest pensione I could locate, a dingy single room above a bakery, smelling faintly of yeast and old wood. The elderly woman who ran the place spoke no English, but her eyes held a weary understanding as she took my few euros and showed me to the room. Narrow bed, cracked sink in the corner, shared bathroom down the hall. She patted my arm sympathetically before leaving me alone with my despair. I sank onto the lumpy mattress, pulling out my phone, hope flickering weakly. 27 calls to Mark. Every single one went straight to voicemail. My text messages showed delivered, but remained resolutely unanswered. Heart pounding. I tried Mike. Blocked. Dave. Blocked. I systematically tried every one of Mark's friends who had been crammed into that rental car. Blocked. 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 A cold shudder ran through me. This wasn't a drunken impulse he'd regret in the morning. This was calculated. This was deliberate humiliation. Sleep that night was a fragmented, tormented thing, punctuated by desperate, hopeful checks of my phone screen, followed by fresh waves of panic and disbelief. By morning, a fragile sliver of denial had reasserted itself. Surely, this nightmare would end. Mark would reappear, sheepish, maybe still blaming me for overreacting to his joke, but ultimately ready to resume our carefully constructed life in Chicago. Him, the respected architect. Me, his supportive wife, who'd quietly shelved her own interior design career years ago to better manage his home, his social life, his needs. But he didn't come. The second day crawled by. I rationed my dwindling cash, nursing a single espresso for hours, buying only a dry panini for lunch. I walked the perimeter of Castelvecchio, my inappropriate sandals rubbing blisters on my heels, meticulously checking every hotel, every restaurant, every piazza, scanning faces for any sign of Mark or his friends, any remnant of our tour group. By evening, the awful truth solidified. They had moved on. They had simply continued their planned itinerary, likely already enjoying dinner in Florence, without a backward glance. On the third day, despair threatening to engulf me, a lifeline appeared. The owner of the small cafe where I'd spent hours nursing cheap coffees, his face etched with concern, approached me. In halting, broken English, he offered me a free espresso and, crucially, pointed me towards the local carabinieri station. The police officer on duty listened patiently, his expression suggesting abandoned tourists weren't entirely uncommon, but the language barrier proved insurmountable. My non-existent Italian and his limited English resulted in little more than a filed report, a sympathetic shrug, and a feeling of utter hopelessness. That afternoon, standing numbly on a quiet side street, I made the hardest decision of my life up to that point. Before a cramped, dusty pawnshop window, displaying old watches and tarnished silver, I twisted off my wedding ring. Not the modest gold band we'd exchanged at our wedding, but the large 2-carat diamond solitaire Mark had upgraded me to on our 5th anniversary. A symbol, I now realized, less of love and more of his possession. The shopkeeper, a shrewd man with tired eyes, offered me far less than its glittering worth, but it was enough. Enough euros to fund the next step, whatever that might be. America? Call family? The pawnbroker suggested, counting out the worn bills. I nodded mutely, but inside, a different, defiant plan was taking shape. Calling family meant explanations I wasn't ready to give. It meant enduring my mother's inevitable, "I told you so," about Mark's temper. It meant facing the pitying or judgmental eyes of friends who had surely seen the cracks in our marriage I'd tried so desperately to conceal. No, not back there. Not yet. The small bus station in Castelvecchio was quiet, almost deserted in the late afternoon heat. The electronic departure board displayed a list of destinations: Rome, Siena, Florence, places I'd meticulously researched for our trip, places now tainted by betrayal. An overnight bus to Rome, connections to ferries, other buses, routes leading away, far away, to places where Mark and his friends wouldn't think to look, assuming they ever bothered. My finger hovered over my father's name in my phone contacts. One call. That's all it would take. He'd wire money instantly, no questions asked initially, though they'd come later. One call, and I could book a flight back to Chicago, back to the sleek condo, back to the life I had so carefully built. Or rather, the life that had been built around me. A life where, I now saw with painful clarity, I had progressively made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, to accommodate Mark's ever-expanding ego, his professional ambitions, his social needs. A sudden, vivid memory surfaced. Mark, laughing, playfully hiding my design portfolios when I'd tentatively mentioned wanting to take on a small freelance project a few years ago. "Why complicate things, Chloe?" he'd asked, kissing my forehead dismissively. "We don't need the extra money, honey, and I really need you focused on our life right now, managing the house, the entertaining." I'd laughed it off then, persuaded by his logic, flattered by his supposed need for me. Sitting on that hard plastic bench in the grimy Italian bus station, the memory felt less like affection and more like another carefully constructed bar in the gilded cage he'd built around me. "Where you go?" The ticket agent, an older woman with kind, observant eyes, had clearly noticed me staring blankly at the departure board for nearly 20 minutes. Her voice startled me back to the present. "Greece," I answered, the decision crystallizing, solidifying the moment the word left my lips. It felt right, far, different, unexpected. "To the furthest coastal village your bus's route can get me to, please." 14 hours later, after a cramped overnight bus ride, a bewildering transfer in Rome, another long bus journey, and finally, a lurching ferry crossing shimmering blue water, I stumbled onto solid ground. My body was a symphony of aches. Stiff neck, sore back, legs cramped from hours in uncomfortable seats. The sharp, clean scent of salt air mingled with the earthy aroma of unseen olive groves greeted me. I took in the scene, whitewashed buildings clinging to a hillside overlooking a turquoise bay, fishing boats bobbing gently in the small harbor. Aethelburg, according to the weathered signpost, another place whose name felt foreign on my tongue. My phone battery had died somewhere on the ferry between Italy and Greece. My stomach was a hollow ache of hunger. The weight of what had happened, what Mark had done, what I had just done by running further away instead of home, pressed down on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. Exhaustion blurred the edges of my vision as I began to wander aimlessly towards what looked like the village center, a small cluster of buildings around a tiny square. 3 days of emotional whiplash had left me utterly raw, cycling through waves of white-hot rage at Mark, paralyzing fear of my unknown future, and beneath it all, a strange, unexpected, persistent flicker of something that felt dangerously like liberation. My remaining euros, carefully counted, would maybe cover 2 nights in the absolute cheapest room I could possibly find, if such a thing existed here. After that, no plan, no contacts, no ability to communicate beyond nodding, pointing, and the universal language of desperation. As I stood near the harbor wall, watching the sunset paint the Aegean waters in breathtaking shades of gold and pink, a profound calmness settled over me, deeper than any I'd felt in years. Mark had intended to punish me, to teach me a lesson about dependence, about knowing my place. Instead, in his drunken arrogance, he had unintentionally, irrevocably set me free. The Greek sun, the next day, felt relentless, beating down on my uncovered head as I found myself wandering further away from the small cluster of houses that constituted Aethelburg. My feet, already blistered from days of walking in flimsy sandals meant for Chicago sidewalks, screamed in protest against the dusty, uneven path. My small water bottle had been empty for hours. The potent combination of dehydration, gnawing hunger, and sheer emotional depletion made the world tilt and sway around me. Silver-green trees lined the path, their leaves shimmering like ancient coins in the intense sunlight. Olive groves, I registered dimly, just before my knees gave way. The hard-packed earth rushed up to meet my face. I barely felt the impact. Darkness crowded the edges of my vision, and a strange sense of peace washed over me. Perhaps this is fitting, I thought hazily. Abandoned by my husband in one foreign country, only to collapse alone and anonymous in another. I closed my eyes, finally surrendering to the crushing exhaustion that had been building since Mark's laughing face disappeared down that Italian road. "Ella! Psst! Kira?" A woman's voice, urgent but kind, cut through the haze. Weathered, work-worn hands gently turned me over. An elderly face swam into focus above me, framed by flyaway gray hair escaping a kerchief. Deep lines were etched around remarkably bright, kind eyes, now wide with concern. She spoke rapidly in Greek, patting my cheeks lightly, then held a dented metal canteen to my lips. The cool water, tasting slightly of tin, revived me enough to sit up, though my head still seemed violently. She introduced herself, pointing firmly to her chest. "Sophia." I mimicked the gesture, my voice a weak croak. "Chloe." Sophia helped me struggle to my feet, her small, wiry frame surprisingly strong as she supported my weight. She pointed up a gentle slope towards a simple stone farmhouse, nestled amongst the olive trees, then made walking motions with her fingers. I nodded, lacking the strength or will to resist, as she slowly, patiently guided me up the dusty hill. The farmhouse kitchen, when we finally reached it, welcomed me with the comforting aroma of dried herbs hanging from dark wooden ceiling beams and something savory bubbling softly on an ancient, wood-fired stove. Sophia settled me gently onto a chair at a worn, scarred wooden table, fussing over me like a concerned mother hen before calling out a name. A man's voice answered from somewhere deeper within the house, and moments later, an elderly gentleman appeared in the doorway. He had a deeply tanned, sun-creased face, a thick silver mustache, and kind, cautious eyes. He wiped his hands on a rough cloth tucked into his waistband. "Costas," Sophia said, pointing to him simply. "Her husband." He nodded at me, his gaze questioning but not unfriendly. Sophia bustled about, pouring cool water from a terracotta jug into a glass and pressing it into my hands, followed quickly by a steaming bowl of simple, fragrant lentil soup. My stomach growled loud enough for both of them to hear, prompting a warm, crinkling smile from Sophia that reached her eyes. That first evening passed in a surreal haze of exhaustion and broken communication. I tried, haltingly, to explain my situation, the abandonment, the lack of money, the stolen ring, using the few Greek words I vaguely remembered from a long-ago travel show, combined with frantic hand gestures and, eventually, helpless tears. Sophia listened intently, nodding as if she understood every nuance, though I knew she couldn't possibly grasp the full story. Costas remained mostly silent, observing me with quiet attentiveness, occasionally asking Sophia a question in rapid Greek, which she would attempt to translate through gestures, a shrug for husband, a driving motion for left. They offered me their spare room without hesitation, a small, simple space with stark, whitewashed walls, a narrow bed covered by a colorful, handmade quilt, and a single window overlooking the olive groves. Too exhausted and overwhelmed to protest or even properly express my gratitude, I collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning arrived abruptly, with the sound of roosters crowing nearby and the irresistible aroma of fresh bread baking. Folded neatly at the foot of my bed were clean clothes, a simple, faded cotton dress and a soft, knitted cardigan, decades old perhaps, but spotlessly clean and smelling faintly of sunshine and lavender. They hung loosely on my frame, a testament to the weight I'd lost, but felt like a welcome embrace compared to the travel-worn outfit I'd been living in for days. In the kitchen, Sophia beamed when she saw me, immediately ushering me to the table and serving strong, sweet coffee, thick slices of fresh bread still warm from the oven, drizzled with golden olive oil and local honey. With the clarity of daylight and a rested mind, embarrassment began to creep in. These kind strangers had taken me in off the road, fed me, clothed me, sheltered me, all without question. I had to explain myself properly, offer some form of payment, figure out how to move on and not impose further. Using a combination of my slowly returning energy, more gestures, and crucially, the translation app on my phone, now charged thanks to an ancient adapter Costas had miraculously produced, I attempted to convey my immense gratitude and my intention to return to the village, perhaps find work, or contact someone back home. Sophia's face fell the moment she understood my intention to leave. She shook her head vigorously, her gray braids flying. She pointed first outside, where a soft rain now pattered against the window panes, then pointed insistently at my still blistered, swollen feet. "Stay?" she insisted, uttering one of the few English words she seemed to know with forceful conviction. "Rest." Over the next 3 days, I made several more tentative attempts to leave. Each time, I was met with Sophia's gentle but firm resistance. Once, I actually had my small purse slung over my shoulder, my battered sandals buckled, ready to walk out the door, when she intercepted me, her expression so genuinely wounded, so full of unspoken pleading, that a wave of guilt washed over me. She took my hand gently and led me over to a small carved wooden box sitting on the rough-hewn mantelpiece. Opening it carefully, she revealed a handful of faded photographs. Her fingers, roughened by years of work, trembled slightly as she pointed to a sepia-toned image of a smiling young woman who had Sofia's bright eyes and Costas's determined chin. "Maria," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Then she pointed vaguely towards the horizon, far away. "Australia!" Her eyes filled with tears as she made a cradling motion with her arms, then held her hand at waist height, indicating a small child. "Grandbaby," she managed in heavily accented English, pointing to a more recent, slightly blurry photo of an infant wrapped in a blue blanket. "No see." In that moment, I understood. Sofia wasn't just being kind. She saw in me a lost and lonely woman far from home, a phantom echo of her absent daughter, Maria. My presence, perhaps, filled a tiny corner of the hollow space left behind. Instead of feeling manipulated or trapped, my heart ached with empathy for her quiet, enduring loss. I nodded slowly, meeting her tear-filled gaze, and deliberately returned my purse to the simple wooden hook by the door. My decision to stay, at least for a while longer, marked the true beginning of my integration into their lives, into the rhythm of the farm. Each day brought new routines, new lessons. Sofia showed me how to gather eggs from the small flock of chickens without startling them into a flurry of squawks. How to hang laundry on the line strung between olive trees so the mountain breeze would catch it just right, billowing the sheets like sails. Costas patiently taught me the difference between weeds and precious herbs in the sprawling vegetable garden, his lips twitching in amusement when I mistakenly pulled up a fragrant oregano plant the first time. The work was relentlessly physical, a world away from my carefully curated life in Chicago, with its boutique fitness classes and measured exercise routines. My body protested initially. New calluses bloomed on my city-soft hands. Muscles I hadn't known existed screamed in protest each evening. But with each passing day, the aches lessened, replaced by a growing sense of strength and capability. More importantly, the constant, frantic mental cycling through Mark's betrayal, the what-ifs, the how-could-he's, began to quiet, replaced by the simpler, more immediate concerns of farm tasks, language barriers, and the quiet satisfaction of physical labor. In the evenings, sitting on the small stone porch, while Sofia knitted intricate patterns by fading light, and Costas smoked his pipe, staring out at the darkening groves, I found myself experiencing unexpected moments of deep, profound peace. The betrayal still stung, a wound not yet healed, but here, surrounded by the ancient olive trees and the steady, unchanging rhythms of rural life, it began to feel less like the devastating end of my story, and more like the start of a challenging, unforeseen, but not entirely unwelcome new chapter. 2 weeks after my arrival, as Sofia and I sat companionably side by side on the porch, shelling peas freshly picked from the garden, she studied my face, her expression thoughtful. Then, slowly, carefully forming the English words, she asked, "Home? You want go home?" She made a flat, swooping motion with her hand, mimicking an airplane, then pointed vaguely westward, towards America. The simple question struck me with unexpected force. Home. The word immediately conjured images of our sleek, modern Chicago brownstone, designer furniture, carefully coordinated decor, a space I had meticulously curated to reflect Mark's professional success and social standing. But beneath the polished surface, the word also brought Mark's controlling behaviors into sharp, uncomfortable focus. His helpful consolidation of our finances that left me without independent access to funds, his subtle but persistent discouragement of my close friendships, his dismissive attitude towards my own dormant career aspirations in interior design. Unexpected tears spilled, tracing paths down my dusty cheeks as a torrent of words poured out, a jumbled mix of English and the few Greek phrases I'd picked up. It didn't matter that Sofia couldn't understand every word. The raw emotion transcended the language barrier. I told her about Mark's casual cruelty, the calculated abandonment, the years of slowly surrendering pieces of myself, my ambition, my independence, my voice, just to keep the peace, to maintain the facade of a perfect marriage. Sofia's weathered hand covered mine as I spoke, her touch a silent anchor. When my words finally trailed off into exhausted silence, she simply pointed first to her own heart, then gestured expansively to the farmhouse and the olive groves surrounding us, and finally pointed directly at me. Her meaning was crystal clear, profoundly moving. You have a place here. You belong here, if you want. Work, I said carefully, meeting her gaze, mimicking Costas tending the olive trees. I stay. I work. Sofia's smile bloomed then, radiant as the sunrise over the Aegean Sea. She nodded firmly, squeezing my hand before turning back to her peas, as if we had just agreed on something as simple and ordinary as the menu for tomorrow's lunch, rather than the complete and utter redirection of my entire life. My decision to stay marked the beginning of my real education. The very next morning, Sofia shook me awake while the stars still glittered in the pre-dawn sky. She handed me a set of worn but clean work clothes and sturdy boots that had likely belonged to her daughter, Maria. Half asleep, I followed her and Costas out into the cool, dark groves where the first hints of dawn were just beginning to illuminate the gnarled, ancient trees. Elias, Sofia said, pointing to the branches heavy with ripening fruit. She demonstrated the proper harvesting technique, gently combing the branches with long wooden rakes, letting the olives shower down onto large nets spread carefully beneath the trees. My first clumsy attempt sent more twigs and leaves raining down than precious fruit, earning me a patient, wordless correction from Costas. By mid-morning, with the sun climbing high and blazing overhead, my shoulders burned with unaccustomed exertion, and my hands, despite the work gloves, had developed their first angry blisters. Genie domina hens, Sofia teased gently at our lunch break, examining my raw palms with a sympathetic cluck. Boston lady hands. She disappeared into the house and returned with a small jar of thick, green, homemade salve that smelled intensely of herbs and beeswax. The cooling relief was immediate as she carefully smoothed it across my stinging skin. Tomorrow, she promised, pointing at my hands. Better. And surprisingly, she was right. Each day brought small improvements. My harvesting technique became more refined, my movements less wasteful. My physical strength grew steadily, my stamina increasing. My hands toughened, the blisters replaced by thickening calluses. Within a few weeks, I could work alongside Sofia and Costas for hours without complaint, taking a quiet pride in the growing piles of harvested olives, the tangible result of our shared labor. The sorting process proved even more meticulous. Seated at a long wooden table under the shade of a grape-laden pergola, we painstakingly separated the olives by size and quality, the perfect, unblemished ones destined for their premium extra virgin oil, the slightly bruised or marked ones for a second-grade pressing. The damaged or overripe fruit set aside for making soap. Sofia watched me like a hawk initially, her fingers gently nudging mine, correcting my mistakes with quiet patience. Gradually, her interventions became less frequent as my eye developed, learning to discern the subtle differences in color and texture that indicated quality. You learn fast, Costas commented one evening, startling me. His broken English was slowly improving alongside my rudimentary Greek. It was perhaps the highest compliment he'd paid me since my arrival, and a warmth spread through my chest at his gruff approval. My education extended beyond the groves and into Sofia's kitchen, a space that had initially intimidated me with its lack of modern appliances and reliance on intuition over instruction. Back in Chicago, I'd considered myself a decent cook, capable of following complex recipes from glossy magazines for the dinner parties that impressed Mark's colleagues. But Sofia's cooking was different, elemental, ancestral. There were no measuring cups or digital thermometers, just generations of knowledge passed down through hands and observation. Vlepe, she'd say, watch, kneading dough for bread with practiced, rhythmic motions. I'd mimic her clumsy attempts, my first loaves emerging from the outdoor stone oven misshapen, often either doughy in the middle or burnt to a crisp. Askisi, Sofia would encourage. Practice, breaking apart even my worst attempts to taste them. Tipota den peihamino. Nothing is wasted. Her calm acceptance of imperfection, of the learning process itself struck me as revolutionary. In my previous life, mistakes felt like failures to be hidden or agonized over, not necessary stepping stones towards mastery. The simplicity and freshness of their meals highlighted just how processed and disconnected my American diet had become. Here, almost everything came directly from their land or neighboring farms. Vegetables still warm from the sun, eggs collected that morning, cheese from the goat herd down the road. The flavors were astonishingly vibrant, clean, needing little more than their own fragrant olive oil, fresh lemon juice, and handfuls of herbs from Sofia's overflowing garden to sing. My body transformed on this diet of real food and hard physical work. The designer clothes I'd arrived in, once stylishly tailored, now hung loosely as unnecessary weight melted away, replaced by lean muscle I hadn't known I possessed. My complexion, previously maintained through expensive serums and creams, glowed with a healthy vitality nurtured by simple olive oil soap, fresh air, and honest sweat. When I occasionally caught sight of myself in the small, cracked mirror above the bathroom sink, a stranger sometimes looked back, tanned, stronger, clearer-eyed, somehow more substantial despite weighing less. As my Greek vocabulary slowly expanded beyond simple nouns and verbs, Sofia and I found ways to communicate more deeply, sharing stories during evening breaks. She brought out treasured photo albums, pointing to black and white images of her youth in the village, revealing, to my surprise, that she'd been a schoolteacher before marrying Costas and returning to her family's olive farm. "Easy?" she asked one evening, mimicking typing on a keyboard. "You?" Hesitantly, I took out my phone, scrolling back through old photos until I found images of my interior design projects from before my marriage, the career Mark had subtly encouraged me to abandon. Sofia studied them intently, pointing to specific design elements she liked, making appreciative sounds. "Exipni idea," she said, tapping her temple. Smart thinking, her simple, genuine validation of my creative work, something Mark had gradually withdrawn as our marriage progressed, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. One rainy afternoon, Sofia patiently taught me to knit, her own needles clicking rhythmically as I fumbled, dropped stitches, and created uneven, hole-ridden rows. My first completed project was a simple, lumpy scarf in a cheerful blue yarn, undeniably imperfect, yet entirely made by my own hands. I wrapped it around my Amy neck with more pride than I'd ever felt wearing the expensive cashmere scarf Mark had given me the previous Christmas. Other handmade possessions slowly followed. A slightly lopsided clay mug formed under Costas's patient guidance during a visit to the village potter, a woven reed basket I learned to make from a neighbor down the road. Each imperfect item represented hours of learning, connection, and shared experience, carrying stories and memories that no purchased luxury good ever could. My small collection grew as my attachment to material perfection diminished, replaced by an appreciation for process, connection, and things made with care. After 3 months of working diligently alongside them, sharing their meals, and absorbing their knowledge, essentially functioning as an unpaid apprentice in exchange for room and board, Sofia approached me one morning after breakfast, with Costas standing quietly at her side. They led me not towards the groves, but to the small stone building where they pressed and bottled their precious olive oil. Inside, the air was cool and fragrant. They showed me the modest inventory they produced from our recent harvest, bottled and ready. "Agora Cimera," Sofia announced, pointing to the calendar hanging on the wall. "Market day. Easy ercase. You come." The village market, held weekly in the main square, buzzed with a vibrant energy that instantly captivated me. Farmers and artisans from the surrounding area displayed their goods, fresh produce, local cheeses, handmade crafts, fragrant herbs, while locals and a scattering of tourists browsed, chatted, and bartered good-naturedly. Sofia and Costas set up their simple wooden table, carefully arranging bottles of golden green olive oil, stacks of fragrant olive soap, and jars of glistening preserved olives. Then, to my utter surprise, they positioned me at the front of the stall. "Milas esi," Sofia instructed gently. "You speak." My initial attempts were clumsy, my broken Greek mixing awkwardly with gestures and occasional English words when tourists approached. There were moments of confusion, bursts of shared laughter with patient customers. But gradually, sales began to accumulate. By the time the market began to wind down in the early afternoon, we had sold a respectable amount. As we packed up the remaining inventory, Sofia carefully counted the day's earnings, then separated a portion of the crumpled euros and pressed an envelope into my hand. "Dico so meridio," she said simply. "Your part. Dekai douleia, dekai plurmi." Fair work, fair pay. I stared down at the modest sum, perhaps enough to cover a single appetizer at one of the upscale restaurants Mark and I used to frequent in Chicago. Yet, this small bundle of worn bills represented something far more valuable, something I hadn't truly possessed in years: independence. Money earned solely through my own labor, my own efforts. No strings attached, no unspoken expectations of gratitude or subservience, just fair compensation for honest work. That night, back in my small room at the farmhouse, I placed the envelope carefully under my pillow, occasionally reaching out in the darkness to touch it, as if confirming its reality. For nearly a decade, Mark had gradually, almost imperceptibly, taken control of our finances to simplify things, leaving me with access only to credit cards linked to accounts he monitored. This small stack of euros felt monumental, the first tangible step towards rebuilding a life, a future that belonged entirely and unequivocally to me. As I drifted towards sleep, a comforting thought surfaced. I hadn't thought about Mark, not even once, during the entire busy market day. My mind had been too occupied with stumbling through Greek phrases for quantities and prices, with the quiet pride of selling oil we had harvested and pressed together. The vast space he had once occupied in my thoughts, my anxieties, my plans, had shrunk considerably, replaced by the immediate realities of olive groves, kitchen lessons, market days, and the growing certain knowledge that I was capable of far more than he, or even I, had ever allowed myself to believe. The following week, Sofia and Costas invited me to join them for dinner at the local taverna. In the village square, a first since my arrival, dressed in a simple but clean blouse borrowed from Sofia, I felt a nervous flutter as we walked into the bustling, brightly lit establishment. The owner, a jovial, barrel-chested man named Giannis, greeted Sofia and Costas with loud, enthusiastic embraces before turning curious, assessing eyes towards me. "I Americana mas," Sofia said proudly, gesturing towards me, "our American," a phrase I'd learned to recognize meant inclusion, acceptance. Giannis smiled warmly, ushering us immediately to what was clearly their regular table in a quiet corner. Over shared plates of perfectly grilled fish, crispy potatoes drizzled with lemon, and glasses of strong village wine, the conversation flowed easily, mostly in Greek, which I followed with increasing comprehension. Then, Costas cleared his throat, leaned forward slightly, and spoke in careful, deliberate English, his seriousness catching me completely off guard. "Chloe," he began, "we want to talk business. With you." My heart gave a sudden lurch. Had I made some terrible mistake? Offended someone? Was this their gentle way of telling me it was time to move on? Sofia must have seen the panic in my eyes, because she reached across the table, patting my hand reassuringly, before continuing where her husband left off. "We old now," she stated simply, pointing between herself and Costas. 68, 70 years. No children here." She glanced towards the window, towards the sea. "Maria, not coming back." Costas nodded solemnly in agreement. "We think, retire soon. 2, 3 years, maybe. But olive trees." He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, encompassing their legacy. 200 years old. Need young hands." My breath caught in my throat as the implication began to dawn, slow and staggering. Sofia smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners, sensing my understanding. "You learn fast," she continued softly. "Work hard. We teach everything." Then, she spread her weathered hands wide on the table, as if offering the world. I bib keresi diki so. The business, yours. The proposition left me stunned, speechless. They barely knew me, really. A foreigner, a stranger who had literally collapsed on their doorstep just months ago. Yet here they were, offering me not just a job, not just a partnership, but a future, a legacy I hadn't dared to imagine, even in my wildest dreams. But I don't know enough, I stammered, overwhelmed. The trees, the pressing process, the business side. Tha Matthäus, Costas said firmly, his gaze steady. You learn. Tha didaskume, we teach. Den uparchi viasini, no rush. That night marked the beginning of my true apprenticeship. I was no longer just an extra pair of hands, a grateful guest. I was the designated heir to generations of accumulated knowledge. Each morning, Costas took me through different sections of their sprawling groves, explaining the subtle ways soil variations impacted olive flavor, how to identify the earliest signs of blight or infestation, precisely when to harvest each variety for optimal oil quality. Sofia focused on teaching me the business records, a somewhat chaotic combination of handwritten ledgers and basic computer spreadsheets their grandson had attempted to set up during a holiday visit years prior. Her method of tracking expenses and income was functional, but decidedly old-fashioned. Seeing an opportunity to contribute something beyond physical labor, something uniquely mine, I spent my evenings carefully updating their systems, creating clear digital records that made tracking inventory, sales, and customer orders infinitely simpler. Koida! Look! I showed Sofia one night, demonstrating how easily we could now filter the spreadsheet to see which oil varieties sold best at which markets, or track overdue payments from restaurant clients. Her eyes widened as clear patterns emerged from the previously jumbled numbers. Exipno! She nodded approvingly, tapping her temple. Smart. Boston lady brain. Kalogiatin epicarisi. Good for business. With their blessing, I began implementing other small but impactful marketing improvements. Our simple, hand-labeled bottles received professionally printed tags I designed, including brief descriptions of flavor profiles and suggested food pairings, knowledge gleaned from countless hours observing and participating in Sofia's intuitive cooking. I created a simple trifold brochure detailing their traditional cultivation and pressing methods, anticipating the questions tourists frequently asked at our market stand. My rapidly improving Greek helped forge connections beyond Sofia and Costas's immediate circle. The village pharmacist, who provided Sofia's blood pressure medication, began stopping by our market stall not just for oil, but for lengthy conversations that ranged from local politics to remedies for ailing olive trees. The baker's wife invited me to join her weekly coffee gathering with other village women, initially intimidating, but ultimately an invaluable immersion in local dialect, customs, and gossip. Giannis, the taverna owner, became an unexpected but enthusiastic ally when he began featuring our premium oil as a standard table offering, placing small cards with our newly designed labels prominently on each table. Kalogia sena, kalogia mena, he explained with a wink when I thanked him profusely. Good for you, good for me. Word began to spread. Soon, 2 other restaurants in neighboring towns contacted us about becoming regular suppliers. 6 months after stumbling into Aethelburg, seemingly at the end of my rope, I attended the baptism of the butcher's granddaughter, my first formal village celebration. Standing quietly at the back of the small, incense-filled church, I watched the ancient community ritual with a lump forming in my throat. Afterwards, the elderly priest, Father Georgos, made a point of seeking me out, switching to the halting English he'd learned during seminary decades ago in Athens. You bring new life to Old Grove, he said, his rheumy eyes twinkling kindly. Is good for village. Young people, they leave. For Athens, for America. Village needs new blood. His simple words, his public acceptance, seemed to dismantle the last invisible barrier. Invitations flowed more freely after that, to name day celebrations, impromptu beach gatherings, even a village committee meeting about organizing the upcoming summer festival. Each event wove another vital strand into the intricate web of connection that was now holding me firmly, willingly in place. Irina, the weaver whose stall stood beside ours at the weekly market, became a particular friend. A woman in her 40s, widowed young herself, she possessed a sharp wit and a pragmatic outlook that reminded me fondly of my college roommate. Our conversations, conducted in a comfortable mix of my improving Greek and her excellent English, ranged from market strategies and village politics to more personal reflections. "You never speak of America," she observed one quiet afternoon as we were packing up our unsold goods. "Family there? Friends?" The question pierced through the comfortable present I'd built, hitting an unexpectedly vulnerable spot. I'd become so focused on cultivating my new life that I'd deliberately, perhaps defensively, pushed thoughts of my old one into a locked compartment. "My parents died years ago," I began, then hesitated. "A few friends, but—" I trailed off, suddenly realizing the full extent of how effectively Mark had isolated me over the years, always finding subtle reasons why my college friends were too demanding, or my work colleagues weren't our kind of people. Irina nodded knowingly, her expression understanding. "The husband," she stated simply, "the one who left you in Italy. You never say his name." "Mark," I said, the single syllable feeling foreign, almost metallic on my tongue after months of disuse. "His name is Mark." "And he never searched for you?" Her directness, typical of Irina, was refreshing after months of Sofia and Costas's gentle, protective avoidance of the topic. I don't know," I admitted truthfully. "I haven't checked. My phone—" I gestured vaguely. I'd powered it on occasionally to take photos of the stunning scenery, but I had completely abandoned my American email addresses, my social media accounts, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to confront whatever messages or realities might be waiting there. Irina raised a challenging eyebrow. "Perhaps it is time to look," she suggested gently but firmly. "Not for him. For you. To close the door properly." Her words resonated, lodging themselves in my mind. That evening, after helping Sofia clear the dinner dishes, I retreated to the quiet solitude of my room. My hands trembled slightly as I took out my old smartphone, plugged it in, and connected to the farmhouse's slow, basic Wi-Fi. With a deep breath, I logged into my long-neglected personal email account. Hundreds, maybe thousands of unread messages flooded the screen. My eyes scanned the senders, junk mail, promotional offers, and then several threads from old college friends. Their subject lines evolved over the months from casual check-ins, "Hey, long time no see," to increasingly concerned inquiries. "Chloe? Everything okay? Worried about you." A wave of shame washed over me. In my own trauma and subsequent reinvention, I had effectively disappeared from their lives without a word, just as thoroughly as I had vanished from Mark's. Then, a sender name caught my eye. Sarah Jenkins, my former design mentor. The subject line read, "Job opportunity, exciting remote position," followed by increasingly urgent follow-ups. Curious, I opened the thread. Sarah had recommended me months ago for a remote consulting position with a promising, sustainable building materials company. The final email, dated just 2 weeks prior, indicated the position was, remarkably, still open if I was interested. An unexpected bridge back to my former professional life. Before I could fully process this possibility, another email sender name made my fingers freeze on the screen. Mark Davis. Subject, "I know where you are." The timestamp showed it had arrived just a few hours ago. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I clicked it open. "Chloe," it began, devoid of any warmth or apology. "It's taken months and a considerable expense for a private investigator, but I've finally tracked you to that backward little village in Greece. This ridiculous charade has gone on long enough. I'm coming to bring you home and end this childish tantrum. My flight lands in Athens on Thursday. Be ready. Thursday. 3 days from now. The small room seemed to spin around me as panic and a fresh surge of fury collided in my chest. Bring me home! How dare he! After abandoning me without a backward glance, after months of absolute silence, he expected to simply show up and collect me, like some misplaced piece of luggage? I stumbled downstairs, the phone clutched tightly in my hand, my knuckles white. Sophia looked up from the account ledger spread across the kitchen table, her welcoming smile fading instantly as she registered the look on my face. Kati kako apotin Ameriki? She asked gently. Bad news from America? Oh, Marcos, I managed, my voice trembling. Mark. Erchatai Edo, Tin Pempti. He's coming here. Thursday. Sophia's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Without a word, she reached beneath the ledger she'd been working on and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, sliding it across the worn wooden table toward me. Kalos synchronismos, tote, she murmured. Good timing, then. Perimena tin kata lili stigmi. I was waiting for the right moment. Inside the envelope, I found official-looking legal papers, bearing my name alongside Sofia's and Costas's, typed neatly in Greek with meticulous English translations provided below. Symphonia eterikis skesis, Sophia explained softly, tapping the heading. Partnership agreement. Ena trito tis epikerisis, diko su, Torah. 1/3 of the business. Yours. Now. Not future. Now. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the document, the weight of its significance settling deep within me. This wasn't just the promise of future inheritance. It was legal, present-tense partnership. Not just employment or apprenticeship, but legitimate ownership. Not just a place to stay, but a tangible foundation upon which to build. Not charity, but earned recognition of my work, my commitment. Esi apophasises, tai the Guinea tin pimpti, Sophia said firmly, her gaze meeting mine, unwavering. You choose what happens Thursday. She tapped the papers emphatically. Eche spiti edo, epche rizi edo, philos edo. You have home here, business here, friends here. Then she pointed towards the phone still gripped in my hand. Ekeinos o anthropos, den apophasise piaia sena. That man, he no longer decides for you. The simple, powerful truth of her words settled over me like a mantle of certainty. For the first time since being abandoned on that dusty Italian roadside, I felt not just resilient, not just surviving, but truly, deeply anchored. Mark was coming, but he would find a very, very different woman than the one he had so casually, cruelly left behind. The following days passed in a blur of quiet preparation, not the kind Mark would expect. There was no frantic packing of bags, no tearful planning of goodbyes. Instead, I focused on fortifying my position, emotionally and legally. I visited Eleni, the village's only lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman recommended by Irina. With her help, I drafted simple divorce papers in both Greek and English, citing abandonment. I contacted my old design mentor, Sarah Jenkins, via email, tentatively accepting the remote consulting opportunity, explaining my situation briefly, and proposing a flexible start date. It felt good to reclaim that part of myself. I even wrote carefully worded emails to my closest college friends, offering a brief, honest explanation for my sudden disappearance months ago, without making excuses or seeking pity. Thursday arrived cloaked in a perfect Greek summer sky, cloudless, impossibly blue, the air warm and scented with wild thyme. I was in the processing shed with Costas, carefully testing the acidity levels of different batches of olive oil, when the unfamiliar sound of a modern rental car engine sputtering up the dirt track broke the afternoon quiet. Sophia appeared at the doorway moments later, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression a mixture of protective concern and calm resolve. Irte, she said simply. He is here. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of cicadas buzzing in the groves. Taking a deep breath, I wiped my own oily hands on my sturdy work apron and stepped out into the bright sunlight. Mark stood beside a sleek silver sedan, looking utterly incongruous against the rustic backdrop. Designer sunglasses perched on his perfectly coiffed hair, he was examining the humble stone farmhouse with an expression of barely concealed distaste. He wore the effortlessly expensive travel attire I recognized from countless business trips: tailored chinos, a crisp button-down shirt, leather loafers. Clothes that probably cost more than a month's profit from our entire olive oil operation. He didn't see me at first, scanning the area as if expecting me to rush out, perhaps tearfully grateful for his arrival. Those precious seconds allowed me to steady myself, to plant my feet firmly on the soil I now helped cultivate. This man, who had once been the absolute center of my universe, whose approval I had craved, whose moods had dictated the emotional weather of my life, now looked strangely diminished, less substantial somehow against the timeless backdrop of ancient olive trees and weathered stone buildings that had become my sanctuary, my home. "Mark!" I called out, surprised by the calmness in my own voice. He turned sharply, and the shock that registered on his face was almost comical. His eyes traveled deliberately down my appearance, from my dusty work boots and simple cotton trousers to my sun-browned arms and my hair, pulled back functionally in a simple scrunchie, tendrils escaping in the heat. I watched, detached, as recognition battled with sheer disbelief across his handsome features. "My God, Chloe," he finally breathed, his voice tight with disapproval. "What on earth happened to you?" The familiar tone, the one that once would have sent me scrambling to apologize, to fix whatever aspect of myself he found lacking, now merely washed over me, as ineffective as a wave against solid rock. "Life happened, Mark," I replied evenly, taking a few measured steps toward him, stopping well outside his personal space. "What are you doing here?" He removed his sunglasses, his practiced, easy charm sliding smoothly into place as he automatically extended his arms, expecting an embrace, perhaps tears of relief. "I've come to take you home, of course," he said, his voice infused with manufactured warmth. This little adventure has gone on long enough, don't you think? Whatever point you were trying to make, this isn't about making a point," I interrupted quietly but firmly, not moving towards his open arms. "This is about making a life." His smile faltered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Behind me, I heard the quiet, solid shuffling sound of Sofia and Costas emerging from the house. Though they couldn't understand our English words, their presence was unmistakable. They positioned themselves just within view, near the doorway, silent guardians, their expressions calm but watchful, ready to intervene if needed. Mark noticed them, his gaze hardening slightly, assessing them. Are these the people you've been staying with?" he asked, his tone shifting, becoming proprietary. "Have they been holding you here? Because if so, they've been teaching me," I cut in sharply, rejecting his implication. "Teaching me about olive farming, about hard work, about community, about kindness without conditions." I gestured broadly towards the groves surrounding us, the source of my newfound purpose. "I'm part owner here now, Mark. I have a business partnership." Disbelief warred with condescension on his face, an expression I knew all too well. "A business? Chloe, be serious. You're an interior designer, remember? Not some peasant farmer. This is just some eat, pray, love phase you're going through after our little fight. I admit," he added, attempting magnanimity, "I shouldn't have left you back there in Italy. It was a stupid, drunken mistake. I've apologized now. It's time to come home." "You've apologized?" I echoed, incredulity lacing my voice. "When exactly? In what universe does tracking me down like a fugitive and demanding I return to a life I no longer want count as an apology?" His jaw tightened, the manufactured charm evaporating completely. "Fine," he snapped. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I left you in Italy. It was immature and wrong. Is that what you want to hear? Can we just move past this now? Why did you even bother looking for me, Mark? I asked, genuinely curious now. It's been months. Why now? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing warily at the elderly couple watching us intently from the doorway. Can we please discuss this privately? In the car, perhaps? No, I stated simply. They don't speak much English, and besides, I have absolutely nothing to hide from them. Why now, Mark? His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. Your parents, he mumbled, looking down at his expensive shoes. They've been calling my office. Friends have been asking questions at events, wondering where you are. Clients visiting the house have noticed you're not around. It looks... He trailed off, unable to voice the real concern. Bad? I finished for him coolly. Bad for your image? It damaged your carefully curated reputation? Our reputation, he corrected sharply. Ditambi, latching onto the we. Our life together, Chloe. The life we built over 10 years of marriage. The life you built, I countered quietly but firmly. The life where I gradually became an extension of you, an accessory to your success. Tell me honestly, Mark, did you even notice how deeply unhappy I was in the months, the years, before Italy? Did you ever actually care? His expression darkened. We had a good life, Chloe. A beautiful home, financial security, respect in the community. What more could you possibly want? Purpose, I answered immediately. Connection, agency over my own choices, my own future. I gestured towards the simple stone house behind me, towards Sofia and Costas standing protectively nearby. I've found all three right here, in a place you dismiss as primitive and backward. This isn't you, he insisted, desperation finally edging into his voice, his control slipping. The Chloe I know, the woman I married, she wouldn't choose this manual labor, this poverty, over comfort and position and everything we had. I smiled then, a small, sad smile, recognizing the fundamental truth tangled within his panicked words. You're right, Mark, I conceded softly. The Chloe you knew wouldn't have. The woman you married might have eventually come back, tail between her legs, grateful for your forgiveness. But that woman? She died somewhere on a dusty roadside in Italy when her husband abandoned her as a joke. The woman standing before you now, she made different choices. Sofia chose that moment to step forward, pressing something into my hand, the folded partnership agreement we had signed just days before. Though she couldn't follow the nuances of our conversation, her intuition, her connection to me, was profound. She sensed the moment had come. I unfolded the document slowly and held it out towards Mark, the Greek and English text clear in the bright sunlight. I have legal ties here now, I stated clearly. A business partnership, responsibilities, commitments to people who value me for my contributions, not for my appearance or my ability to host a flawless dinner party. His face flushed a deep, angry red. This is ridiculous. Whatever game you think you're playing, it's not a game, I said, reaching into the deep pocket of my work trousers for the other envelope, the one Eleni, the lawyer, had prepared. These, I stated, my voice unwavering, are divorce papers, Mark, already filed here in Greece, with provisions for equitable division of assets back in the States. He stared at the plain white envelope as if it might actually burn him. You can't be serious, he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. You'd throw away everything, our life, our home, our status, for this? He gestured dismissively, almost contemptuously, at the modest, functional farmhouse, the ancient olive trees, the very land that had saved me. I'm not throwing away anything, Mark, I replied, stepping forward and placing the envelope firmly into his rigid, unyielding hand. I'm choosing something better, something real, something mine. You left me, remember? You drove away laughing. You just never ever expected I'd actually find my way back. Not to you, but to myself. Without you. His fingers closed reflexively around the papers, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, disbelief, wounded pride, and finally, a cold, simmering fury. "You'll regret this," he finally choked out, but the threat sounded hollow, impotent, even perhaps to his own ears. When the novelty of playing farmer wears off, when you're still hauling olives in the hot sun at 60, you'll remember what you gave up. "Maybe," I conceded quietly, holding his gaze. "But I'd rather risk regret from choices I made freely than live with the crushing certainty of regret from choices that were made for me, or choices I made just to please you." Costas stepped forward then, placing a weathered, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Though he hadn't understood the specifics of our exchange, he recognized its finality in our posture, our tones. He said something brief and direct in Greek to Mark, his voice firm but not unkind. What did he say?" Mark asked, his voice sounding smaller now, diminished. "He said the road back to Athens is winding and dangerous after dark," I translated calmly. "He suggests you should leave now if you want to reach the city before nightfall." Mark looked from Costas's steady gaze to Sofia's resolute expression, and finally back to me, standing tall and anchored between them. He finally seemed to register, fully and completely, that this wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a dramatic rescue mission where he played the forgiving hero. This was a goodbye. Without another word, without even a backward glance, he turned, got back into his sleek rental car, the divorce papers clutched tightly in his hand, and drove away down the dusty track, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of exhaust fumes, quickly dispersed by the time-scented breeze. As the sound of the engine faded into the distance, Sofia slipped her small, strong hand into mine. Together, the three of us, the unlikely partners, the unexpected family, turned and walked back towards the house. My house now, too. The evening's work awaited. Olive oil samples to catalog, dinner to prepare, tomorrow's market inventory to check. My husband had once abandoned me in a foreign country, assuming I'd be helpless, assuming I'd come crawling back, begging for forgiveness once I'd learned my lesson in humility. Instead, I had found fertile ground, literally and figuratively, in which to plant new roots, roots that felt stronger, deeper, and more nourishing than any I had known before. Sometimes, the cruelest actions inadvertently yield the most unexpected gifts. In trying to break me, Mark had accidentally, irrevocably, set me free. Chloe's story is a stunning illustration of how an act of profound cruelty can become the catalyst for an equally profound rebirth. Abandoned and betrayed by her husband Mark and his friends in a small Italian town, Chloe was pushed to the absolute edge. But instead of succumbing to despair or running back to a life that subtly diminished her, she made a courageous choice to move forward into the unknown. Finding refuge and unexpected kindness with Sofia and Costas on a Greek olive farm, Chloe didn't just find shelter. She found purpose, community, and ultimately, herself. Through the rhythm of physical labor, the satisfaction of learning new skills, and the warmth of genuine human connection devoid of manipulation, she shed the skin of the accommodating wife she had become and rediscovered the capable, resilient woman within. Mark's eventual return wasn't a rescue mission, but a final, pathetic attempt to regain control, driven by concern for his own image rather than any genuine remorse or love for Chloe. Her ability to stand firm, to present him with divorce papers and claim her new life, symbolized by the legal partnership with Sofia and Costas, was the ultimate act of reclaiming her power. This narrative powerfully teaches us about the resilience of the human spirit. It underscores the importance of recognizing toxic relationships, even when masked by comfort and familiarity. It highlights how true strength often emerges, not in the absence of hardship, but in our response to it. Chloe's journey shows that sometimes losing everything we thought we wanted allows us to find everything we truly need: self-worth, independence, meaningful work, and authentic connections. It reminds us that our value is inherent and not dependent on anyone else's approval or validation. Thank you for joining Chloe on her incredible journey from abandonment to empowerment, here on Life Stories 1. If her story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of transformation and resilience. Remember, even in the darkest moments, the path to a new beginning might be waiting just around the bend. Take care, and trust your own strength.